be to have a podcast or a hangout last for 8 hours.
Right. Welcome back to the 42 Rev podcast. This is Mike Grace.
And this is James Zolman.
Yeah. And it's working. So webinar, what? So let's want to talk a little bit about webinars today. So I recently once again attended a webinar, and oh man, it was bad. It was really bad. How many webinars have you been to, James?
Oh, too many to count. I've lost track.
Okay.
A lot. I've been to a lot.
Okay, I probably haven't attended as many webinars or watched or listened to as many webinars as you have, but I feel like I've done my fair share of webinars, and I kind of hate them. Maybe it's just me, but yeah, I think they're kind of terrible. But talking to you, it sounds like you've had some good experiences. So I want to talk a little bit about webinars. I'm going to be against and you're going to be for, and we're going to bash it out. We're going to talk about what we think. So my experiences with webinars, generally they're low quality. They're not well planned out. People kind of just sit there. They've got their slide deck or their presentation, and they go through their slides. You know, they welcome people. They say, you know, we've got so-and-so on, and they start reading their slides and talking about what they're presenting. And it just, they're really verbose. They haven't really practiced their presentation. It's just really a waste of time, I think.
Now, hey, real quick, when you say verbose, Mike, do you mean it's filled with jargon, or what do you mean by verbose?
When I use the word verbose, I mean a lot of excessive words and talking that doesn't really help get across the point.
So pretty much what I do every day to you. I'm kidding. Okay, I get it.
But I mean,
thank you.
Oftentimes when you're in a meeting or somebody's presenting that hasn't practiced their presentation, or they haven't really outlined it very well, they kind of drag on a lot. You probably see it a lot at church, where people haven't prepared their talks at church, and they just kind of, okay, get to your point.
Sure. Or any speech that goes over time, they haven't rehearsed it to hit that time specifically.
Yep. Yeah, and they bring in anecdote after anecdote and story, and they kind of, yeah, people, I don't know, it's weird. People kind of get nervous and they feel like they have to fill time, it feels like. So I feel almost every time I've attended a webinar, I feel like that's happened. And yeah, it's terrible. Another
that
thing
is terrible.
Yeah. another thing I've noticed with webinars is I feel like part of the cool part of a webinar is like the opportunity to engage with people. And almost every single webinar that I've been to, they kind of just tack on, oh, hey, does anybody have any questions at the end? And, you know, they let people type in questions into the chat, and then they say, oh, somebody had this question, and then they answer it real quick. And then, you know, one or two questions, and then it's over. It's kind of they're really missing the whole engagement part. I think it's really sad. Again, reading the slides, it's really bad to do it in person, and it's really bad to do it on a webinar. Even if I can't see your face, I still know you're doing it.
I'll agree with that. I think reading slides is poor form regardless, but especially on a webinar where the engagement can be a little bit minimal versus an in-person meeting.
Yeah, and your slides with a lot of text, just stop it. It's really bad. The other thing that kind of frustrates me with webinars is oftentimes it requires me to be at my computer or at my desk, and requires me to be in front of the screen, and it's not on my time schedule. You know, you schedule a webinar, you register for it, and you sit down and watch it at a specific time. And oftentimes I'm not able to attend webinars because it's at a bad time, or It's just not at a time I want to do it. So that kind of annoys me as well. Oftentimes I feel like webinars are really impersonal. When you're in a small group with somebody giving a presentation, you can see them and they can react to the audience. With a webinar, I don't get that. Most of the time I just see slides moving by or screenshots or whatever, and it's really impersonal. And probably more on the technical side, oftentimes the video or audio quality is not very good. Not so much the video quality, but more so the audio quality. Oftentimes the webinars that I've attended, they just use the default mic on their computer or their laptop or whatever, and the audio quality is terrible. Or they're using a conference bridge that just, the audio sucks. Like, why do you have to do this? We live in 2015. You can get a good microphone for like $20 or $50. Why does it have to be like that? So,
Sure.
so just kind of summing everything up, I feel like overall webinars, most people, the way they use webinars and the way I've seen webinars done, people do a webinar and they're trading their effort and their time to just do a webinar that's easy for all of their participants' time. Because most of the webinars that I've been to, whether they've been 30 minutes, 45 minutes, an hour and a half, all the content and the information that they presented could have been compressed into a quarter or half of the time that they used. But it took up a lot of time. So, but it takes more time and effort to plan it out, practice, or use a different medium to get that information compressed more where it can be delivered more efficiently.
Yes, I totally agree. I think you have some very, very valid points that we can circle back to here in just a minute. I have experienced the time schedule issue. I totally get that, understand that. I understand the poor audio quality too, which I still don't understand to this day. I have been on several webinars where the audio quality has certainly been poor. It does sound like they've called into a show from a cell phone with bad signal or a 1x signal, almost like they're radioing it in.
Yeah, or they're at work in the conference room. That's this small, super echoey room, and they're like, the microphone is on the other side of the room, and it's just terrible.
Mm-hmm. Sounds like they're in a tin can.
Yeah.
You know, I actually think I sound like that on our podcast.
Really?
I do. Have you heard that?
I think you sound better than most of the webinars I've listened to.
Okay, maybe a little step above, but I do still feel like I'm talking into a tin can here. I've got to figure out my mic.
Yeah,
it is 2015.
We'll get your mic a little bit closer to your mouth on the next one, maybe. Sounds
good. Maybe I should practically eat it and it will sound better.
There you go. See, I've got mine just right here.
That is right up there. Awesome. All right. Well, I'm for webinars.
Prove me wrong. Show me where I've gone wrong here.
Well, I think, and I don't know that this is considered proof because it's just my thoughts. I think that what you are talking about is somewhat subjective. I think that the attendee needs to be interested in the information that's being presented for it to be an interesting webinar, for it to capture them and to feel engaged with it. I also think that you're spot on in the idea that a lot of these webinars aren't very well planned. And that is an organizational issue. That is a personal problem, so to speak, of the presenter needing to overcome that issue. If anybody has had a public speaking course or has taken a public speaking class online, I think that would really, really play into webinars very well, or even reading a book. There are several good books out there on presentations, making great slides, and it really doesn't take that much more time to do something that's even remotely well planned. So it sounds like you've had just this terrible streak and of bad webinars, of ill-prepared webinars, and I have had the opposite. In fact, I attended a couple sessions from inboundsales.com's recent conference that they did. It was a completely digital conference, so it was practically like watching a webinar for hours on end. And I just had it tuned in on one of my monitors, and I listened in for a couple hours. And it was really nice. I liked listening in. I liked being engaged with it. It was more presentation oriented as far as conference speaking goes.
So it was an actual
well prepared
conference that was going on.
Yes, in fact, I think they said something like over 2 million people were tuned in, or I'm getting that confused with another webinar.
Okay.
That may have been something else. That there may have been 40 to 70,000 actually. Now that I think about it, I'm trying to remember where the last webinar was, where I heard that they said over 2 million people had tuned into that feed.
Wow. So and maybe that's one of the problems that I've had, because if I think about if you consider the recent Google I/O that I watched, if you consider
that's
a
where
webinar,
it was. That's where it was. Those are the ones that said there were over 2 million. Of course, inbound sales isn't that big yet. They're huge. Don't get me wrong, but I guess in my mind I respect them both, so I had them confused with each other.
Yeah, and so I guess I considered the Google I/O that I watched more of a broadcast sort of thing. I didn't think so much of it as a webinar, but if you consider that a webinar, then yeah, that was pretty good. All those presentations are very well planned out and they're rehearsed, and that was engaging. But when I think of webinar, that's not what I think of, and that's not what I've had most of my experience with. So. Well,
maybe you need to experience some enterprise style webinars. Because Google I/O was a broadcast, certainly, and maybe it doesn't fit the exact definition of a webinar. But I've been on other webinars that were similar, or that were immersive and had a great experience. You could see the people doing the presentation at times. They would switch to a PowerPoint, and it was very seamless and well planned. And I think that really makes the experience worth it. Another kind that I've been to is the tutorial kind. They literally take 3 hours or so, and it's a really long webinar, but they coach you through a process or a procedure.
3 hours?
The ones I'm thinking of are for marketing processes and procedures. In fact, one of the most recent ones that I saw was how to take advantage of Teespring, and how a lot of affiliates are rocking Teespring as an income channel for their small businesses. I thought it was fascinating. It was something I was interested in. I did speed it up because it was a pre-recorded webinar. So had it been a little slower, I might have lost interest. So I think speaking fast, Brian Eisenberg taught me once. I had a quick call with him after one of his webinars. Told him I love the pace. It was the first time that I had experienced someone who moved fast and spoke fast and did it right. So I complimented him on it. He said, "Hey, let's jump on a call. I saw your roundup because I think I'd blogged about it, and I was missing some information." So I jumped on the call with him, and he told me that that's one of the things that a lot of people miss with a webinar, or with a conference call even, that to keep people engaged, you just have to spit it out. You have to talk fast, and you have to buzz through things. Don't spend time on minutia or on the details unless they're valuable.
Yeah, absolutely.
So as far as me being for webinars, I'm for them for a lot of business reasons, and I think that consumers like this too. It's evident based on some studies that have been done. So first off, I do like the real-time engagement. I like the ability to score the behavior of the audience, ask them to interact often, ask them for questions, answer questions in real time if they're coming in. I think those types of engagements are incredibly valuable and really immersive. If somebody's truly engaged and listening, it can provide a very cool, immersive, real-time experience. And I like that because you're not restricted to geographical boundaries. You can have a giant audience on a webinar that you can conduct from your office. And I think as a business tool, that's incredibly effective and incredibly powerful. Usually also people attend a webinar. I think this is the reason why I attend webinars, is I'm looking for up-to-date information. I'm looking for the latest. I'm looking for the stuff that hasn't been published yet. Sometimes I'll get on a webinar that is relatively boring, but most of the time it's information that's new to me. And I like that. Or it's about a product that I want to learn more about. So if done right, I think that they're a great marketing tool. They're also usually free. There are some paid for webinars that are absolutely incredible. I have paid for a few webinars. Again, most of those have been in the marketing industry. And I found them incredibly valuable, worth way more than what I paid for.
Cool.
There's an urgency with live webinars too that I think is a fantastic tool for marketing. If you do have that set schedule, yes, it's not too flexible, but because you've registered for it, I think that a follow-up technique that's really valuable and shows that you care about the people who registered but just couldn't make it is you record the webinar and you replay it later at certain times and stream it later so that people can fit it into their schedule.
Yeah,
as long as they know that it's not live, I think that's can be really valuable. They can speed it up if they want to, and that's very useful. As long as they register, they've showed interest.
Yeah, that is a good point.
Another good reason for businesses is the data. You can get more information from a webinar in a lot of cases than you would otherwise, because people, again, want to know the latest trends. They want to understand and learn from you as an expert. And because of that, they're willing to give you their name, their phone number, their email address, in a lot of cases, even more. And the follow-up techniques that you use and the outreach that you use after the webinar can really contribute a lot to your brand experience. And I think that's just as valuable, if not more valuable, than the webinar itself in some cases.
Yeah, that's interesting.
I like how convenient it is. While it does tether you to a device of some type, I think it's convenient. I think it's amazing that I don't have to go to expense to pay for travel. I don't have to technically see you face to face. You're not going to watch me. I can be sitting in my swimming shorts and you would never know. I could be sunbathing. I'd like the convenience a lot of a webinar. I think it's amazing. It really is cost effective for the presenter and the listener. So here I'm going to start diving into a little bit of the studies that I found on webinars. This one was from the Content Marketing Institute and Marketing Profs. They conducted a couple of studies, and we'll link to them in the podcast description, blog, and YouTube description here, the PDFs that I pulled this data from. But it's interesting that 62% of B2B marketers use webinars in their marketing mix. And even more oddly, perhaps, if you're in Mike's camp, but not odd if you're in my camp, it's the second most popular tactic for content marketers as far as business marketing goes. And B2B content marketers believe it is effective to the tune of 64% of them using it. The top tactic that they use and believe is effective is actually in-person events. So if a webinar can come close to being in person and is the second most effective, I think that's really powerful. It's certainly more for the B2B audience, because on the flip side, for consumer marketing and B2C marketing, B2C content marketers, they only believe it is effective 46% of the time. So 46% of those marketers are using a webinar, and it's the 9th most popular tactic for content marketers in the B2C space.
Wow. It's being used a little bit more than I thought it was.
Yeah, well, there's something interesting though too. going back to one of the oldest technology that there is for communication, content marketers in the B2C space believe that the number one most effective tool for them, or the most effective tactic, is e-newsletters. Email newsletters is the most effective tactic for content marketers. I thought that was interesting. But in any case, I do think it matters who your audience is if you're doing a webinar. Obviously, B2B players favor it a lot more. And now that I think about it, I don't know that I've ever attended a webinar for a consumer or as a consumer.
Yeah, interesting. Well, cool. I think you've got some valid points. Yeah, I think you've got some valid points where there are cases to be made where a webinar is the right tool, possibly. So I still think that there are huge amounts of people who are just completely failing at doing webinars, and they're totally missing the point. So
you're right. You're right.
For those people, go ahead.
No, I was just agreeing with you. There are. I totally agree.
Yeah. So I came up with some alternatives. If you are one of those people considering, hey, let's do a webinar, here are some alternatives that you should consider before doing a webinar.
Not before doing a webinar, but if you are not going to take the time to prepare a webinar very well, and you feel like you can get more power out of these alternatives, then go for them. But that's the key. The key is preparation, right?
Yes.
In the B2B space, I would not discourage people from doing webinars ever. I think you ought to do it.
Or if your audience includes me, consider these first. Because I hate your webinar. So one of the alternatives is a podcast. A podcast, and the reason why I list this as an alternative is because you can have fun with a podcast, and just like your pros where you listed, you don't have geo boundaries. It's usually free. It's a great marketing tool. It's convenient for people. People can download it and listen to it whenever they want. If you can get people to subscribe to your podcast, you can have conversations with them all the time. And I feel like the good podcasts that I've listened to before, it's usually 2 or more people having a conversation where they're talking about something and they're having a lot of fun, and it's fun to listen to. So a podcast is a fun, easy way to get your content and information across to people in a way that's different than a webinar. It really unties you from the computer and having to sit in your office. The other alternative would be doing a pre-recorded video that you post, that you edit, right? So take the time to write out your script, what you're talking about, do several takes, edit the video, cut out all the ums and splice things together so it's efficient, and really compact your presentation down to where you have a short, concise video where you're basically doing a webinar, but it's not a webinar because there's not the same engagement. Do a well planned out pre-recorded video. And then this kind of takes away some of the urgency. There are tools you can use to create urgency, but you can reuse this video. You can post it to social media. You can include it on an e-newsletter. You can put it on your blog. You can put it on an FAQ if it's like a training type thing. It's very reusable. Now, people will record webinars so they're available later, right? But if it's not well planned out the first time, rewatching it, I mean, there are tools to speed it up, but yeah, if you're going to do it right, just do it right. Another alternative is writing an article or a blog post. Just write out what you're going to say instead of reading your slides, and let me read through it and scan through it if it's important to me. Another alternative is doing a Google Hangout. If you're trying to really focus on engagement and answering questions and fielding questions, do a Google Hangout where we can see each other, where everybody can see everyone, and we can ask questions and we can have more of a dialogue. That can be hard, but I think that's another alternative depending on what your goals are. And One other alternative I came up with is having conversations with people on social media, whether it's around a hashtag or it's a pre-planned online conversation. You know, have conversations with people online where anybody can jump in and contribute to the conversation. So
Sure. Yes, I love all of those forms of content. Huge fan of podcasting, huge fan of social media, huge fan of Hangouts. I think Hangouts are very close to webinars, and you could call a Hangout a webinar if you
could
really
do
wanted
it. You
to.
could do a webinar on a Google Hangout. Yeah.
So I really like one thing that you mentioned, Mike, and that is it really depends on your goals. Yes, those are alternatives, but I think webinars are still incredibly, incredibly powerful tools to use. And if you're going to do a webinar, then you ought to detail, of course, what is your goal. And with any content, I think that's the main question. If you're going to do a podcast, what is your goal? If you're going to do a Hangout, what is your goal? If you're going to write a blog post, what is your goal?
Yeah. So
and understand why. Go ahead.
Yeah. So you should be able to answer these 3 questions when a webinar crosses your mind. First, like you mentioned, what is your goal? What are you trying to accomplish? Then answer why. Why are you using a webinar or a podcast or a video? Why are you doing that? And answer specifically this 3rd question. Specifically, how does the medium you're using add more value or work better in accomplishing your goal than the other mediums that you're not using? If you can tell me specifically why you're using a webinar instead of pre-recording a well-edited video, or you're doing a podcast or any of that kind of stuff, then maybe you might be able to do a good webinar. But if you can answer those 3 questions, if you can't answer those 3 questions, then you need to go back to the drawing board.
Sure. Well, and I don't think webinars are mutually exclusive to other content. I think you can reformat the content for multiple ways. Let's say you do a webinar and it's an incredible webinar. You learn a lot from it, or you have great data that can now be turned into a white paper that can be downloaded.
Yep.
And from that white paper, you might be able to extrapolate 3 or 4 or 5 or 7 facts that you can turn into a blog post. And from there, you can share it on social media and develop a chat around it or a conversation around it for your company or your brand. I think in the study that Content Marketing Institute and Marketing Profs did, they mentioned that the average B2B marketer is using 11 or 13 tactics all at once in their marketing mix for content marketing. And I don't remember seeing what the statistic was for consumer B2C content marketers, but I thought that was interesting that these tactics certainly aren't mutually exclusive. If you can answer the question, how does this tactic add more value or work better for a specific audience, then go ahead and add that tactic to your toolbox and use it, especially if it's going to meet your goals and you know why you're doing it, of course.
Yeah. Answer the why.
Answer the why. Well, great information, Mike. I appreciate that you don't like webinars. It's just not your style of content. If people want to reach the Mikes of the world, then use other content. Use a good marketing mix and you'll be able to reach those people too. Or if you are trying to reach the Jameses of the world, me, then webinars are awesome. Keep them coming. Keep them well planned. Keep them short. Talk quickly. Bust through your slides. Don't put too much text on your slides, and study presentation skills. I think that will help alleviate Mike's concern a little bit, if you know what I mean.
Yes. Yeah, and I think that's a great last point, that even if you do, one of these mediums, these content mediums, just because you do an awesome job at it doesn't mean that it's going to reach everybody. There may be people like me who, no matter how good your webinar is, they just kind of hate webinars. So it's good to have a mix of mediums where you're reaching out to people and sharing your content.
Absolutely. All right, Mike, really appreciate your thoughts this podcast. We are signing off as 42Rev. Visit us at 42rev.com. Let us know if we can help you, and reach out to us if you want us to cover a certain topic. We'll be happy to cover it. Thank you for listening.
We'll see ya.
Bye.